tonight, Sharon Hansen is going to be talking about mysteries of the Queen Mary. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey everybody, welcome. Give me a second here to get my little notes going here. Good to see you all. It's been a while. We're trying to get things back and flowing with the California Haunts Radio here, and this is the first week. We're going to be on all 4 days. Just a quick reminder: tomorrow's show will be at 1 p.m. Pacific. We're going to have Reverend Bill Bean come in and talk with us tomorrow, so I'm really excited about that. I haven't talked with him in a while, and we're going to be talking about demonics and things like that, because that's what he does. He is an exorcist and a deliverer, and he's quite good at what he does. Quite good. Anyway, looks like my guest has not shown up yet. So I thought we'd talk about the Queen Mary anyway. Let me introduce myself first, because I got ahead of myself. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Queen Mary. I don't know if it'll take up the whole time that we have here for the hour. It might be shorter than that, but we could certainly talk about the Queen Mary ourselves, okay? Because I do know a little bit about that ship. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for who knows how long today. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong, up and down the state of California. We also have branches in Nevada, Washington, and Oregon, and in Hawaii, believe it or not. People are there. We're here to help. It might take us a couple days. Once you get a hold of us, you can find us via social media. But it might take us a couple days to get out to your location, because California, people don't realize how big California is. But once we do get out there, we are pretty efficient in what we do. We've helped people with demonic cases and things like that. So it's been something we've done. So if you need to find us again, check us out on social media. I'm also a tarot card reader. I read cards every night between 7 and 7:15, up till 10:30 p.m. Pacific on TikTok every night under of course, California Haunts. That's who we are, right? So under California Haunts. All right. So our topic tonight is interesting. I learned something today. I did some research on the history of the Queen Mary itself, and I learned something today because, I'd been there since I was a kid, and I'm just checking messages here, guys. Long day. Let me do a quick message. Anyway, I was doing some quick research on the ship itself, and what I found interesting with it is that I always thought, because I know that a lot of the British ships are named after, like we kind of do, like our U.S. Some of our aircraft carriers and battleships, USS Ronald Reagan, things like that. And I realized that a lot of the British ships, the British and Scottish ships, are named after monarchs, right? So me, being me, because the last time I was on the Queen Mary, I was about 22 years old, and that was with my producer, and we were doing the silly ghost tour that Disney had at that time, and I'll explain that in a second. But I always thought it was named, the Queen Mary, right? I thought it was actually named for, Queen off with her head Mary in Scotland. That's what I thought the ship was named for. That's what I thought it was named for. As it turns out, I find out today that the ship is actually named after the Queen Mother, which would have been Queen Elizabeth's mother. That's where the name came from, was Queen Elizabeth. Very interesting to find that out, because like I said, probably everybody but me knows this, right? Because I just went by my dad, what my dad would tell me about that ship and everything. So that was just boom. It's like I should have had a V8 moment when I saw that today. I don't know what happened with Sharon. I apologize, but we're going to talk about the Queen Mary. Okay, I know things. I have friends that actually investigate over there, so we can kind of work on it. We can kind of work on it together. Like I said, don't know how long we'll be on today because of it, but it's not a problem. Okay, it's not a problem. She probably got shy because you got to be on camera and things like that, and yeah, kind of intimidates people. But anyway, my dad was a loved that ship, loved it. I think I went twice when I was real little, as a kid, because every spring break we would go to Disneyland. We'd always go down south, always go to Disneyland, and then he started to add in the Queen Mary, and then my dad and I made a private trip together, just a father-daughter trip, and we went. And I visited at that time they had the Spruce Goose as well there, and so Disney had because Disney owned it for a while, so Disney also had the Spruce Goose there, so I got to see the Spruce Goose and the Queen Mary at that time. But my dad, he was an airplane ship aficionado. So he would take me all over the Queen Mary and show me what was what on the ship, what it did, and all this stuff. So I learned. I learned all about the Queen Mary itself. But like I said, one thing that eluded me all these years was knowing the name of the ship and where it came from, because I always thought it was Mary Queen of Scots. Being me, probably my British friends will probably be very angry with me over it. Okay. Quick reminder too: tomorrow 1 p.m. Pacific, we'll be here with Reverend Bill Bean talking about demonic forces and things, because that's what he does. He is a deliverer, so it should be interesting. So it's always fun to have him on. It's always fun to have him on. Anyway, let's talk about the Queen Mary. They had the whole thing with Titanic, right? They had all those other ships like the Olympic were out there and stuff. And it turns out that there were two cruise lines. There was the White Star and the Cunard. The Queen Mary was part of the Cunard. Well, the Queen Mary was built by part of the Cunard Company. But the White Star Line, and this is what I heard today. I was watching some history. But the White Star Line itself was what owned the Titanic. So they, were having financial troubles. Okay? So when they decided to build the Queen Mary, before it was the Queen Mary at one point was the longest cruise ship ever built. Okay? Longest cruise ship. And so it took, they were trying to get funding to build it. And when they went to the British government for help, the British government wouldn't help unless they merged with White Star. So essentially it became Cunard White Star Line, okay? And then they were able to build the Queen Mary, okay? There was also a sister ship, and the sister ship, I think it was the Olympic. I can't remember exactly what the sister ship was, but you can people will say that in order to put the Queen Mary together, because a lot of these ships went into mothballs. In order to put the Queen Mary together for display for a museum, they went on this other ship and were grabbing parts off of it, because essentially they were sister ships. Okay, only it was smaller. But it's interesting because it took quite a while to build, and it was in a certain river where they were going to launch it. And what happened was that it was so long that they had to figure out a way to do it. It was so long, and its draft was so deep, they had to figure out how to do it because it wouldn't fit into the normal river where they would launch it. And if you've ever seen it, it is big. Compared to the cruise ships they have now, it's nothing. But back like when I was a kid and they hadn't built anything bigger, it is huge. It is huge. In fact, I think it's bigger than the QE2 as far as length. But what's interesting about this ship too is that a lot of history. I knew people that, because I grew up with older people. I was the youngest kid in the family. My sister's 11 years older than I am. So you can fact check me if I'm wrong on some of these facts. Let me know. Thank you, Lori. So I see Lori in there. I see Jennifer in there. I see Kathy in there. Wish my guest would have come, as she was a tour guide on the Queen Mary. But you know what? Not everybody wants to be on camera, right? So we just gotta do what we gotta do. So anyway, I knew people because it was, I was born back. I'm not gonna say when, okay? But let's just say my youngest sister is 11 years older than I am. So her father-in-law had gone to England on the Queen Mary during World War II, and had come back on the Queen Mary during World War II. So he had actually stayed there when they had all the barracks up on the ship. The ship was called the Grey Ghost, and it was so fast that's why there's no reports of it ever getting hit by torpedoes or anything, because the Queen Mary was incredibly fast, real thin. And what was interesting when my dad told me this when we were aboard was that there's been movies made on that ship. And like the Poseidon Adventure. I'm gonna come to that in a second. And different movies, right? Because there's really no cruise ships around from that era left. Like even some of a couple of Titanic movies, not the James Cameron one, of course, but there's been a couple Titanic movies in the past that were made on the Queen Mary. Okay, that were made and produced. TV shows, you know. Sometimes, like if they're on a cruise ship, it's not like a big cruise, like a newer cruise ship. Usually they film on the Queen Mary. Charlie's Angels was filmed on there. There's been quite a few shows filmed on there. Now, getting back to the Poseidon Adventure, my father was the one that pointed it out. The Queen Mary was so sleek when they built it. The problem it had was it rolled a lot. There was always a huge roll, is what my father told me. So the ship would be doing this in the water all the time, even though it was really fast. It was more top heavy. So my father, when the Poseidon Adventure came out, the first Poseidon Adventure, when it came out, he looked at me and he said, "Yeah," he said, "this is a perfect movie for the ship because it never happened. Of course, with the giant wave, but the possibility that could have happened with it is great. Is great because the ship actually rolled. It did pitch and roll." Because he said, well, they should have put stabilizers on it and stuff to keep it stable, you know. And as it is, it's in Long Beach where it's at. It does have stabilizers on it, but that's part of they've got it in its own like alcove area. That's like a jetty. It's in its own jetty. And the thing to remember with it too is it was gutted, so you only go down so far in that ship, and then it's mud because they took everything else out of it on the bottom, and that balances it too as well because it's got all this mud and sand in there to keep it balanced so that when people go on they don't get seasick from it going moving around. But it has an interesting history and the ghosts. Yeah, that is something in and of itself, and you can understand why it would probably be haunted, at this point because it's that history. At one point, my father knew the stories. He didn't know the ghost stories, but he knew the stories surrounding that ship. And at one time, it had run. I think it was during the war. It had run head on through another ship, and the Queen Mary was so well built that when it went through the ship, not hardly any scratch on it. It just went through the ship. Now, that's where some of the ghostly voices are reported. Some of the reports include screaming. You can hear men screaming because it literally broke the other ship in half. I don't know if it went through it or if it just went in enough and then they packed it out, right? To do stuff. But a lot of people died. But the Queen Mary just kept going like an Energizer bunny, right? So that's one of the haunted locations is right at the tip of that bow when you get down there. It's interesting because, like I said, they gutted a huge amount of it and of course remodeled it and stuff so that they could have tourists and everything on there. And so you only go down so far. You go down to the first level of the of I don't know if you want to say the engine room, but I guess they left like one engine room in there, so you can go down and see it. And along those walkways down there, because they're metal, it's just like it was when the ship was running, was running cruises. You go along this walkway and you do hear whispering. Okay, and this is after hours, right? This is after hours, and you can hear whispering, along this walkway. And sometimes people feel like they're being pushed. And one of the stories is that there was a gentleman, and remember that like when you watch the Titanic movie James Cameron made when the ship started to sink, and when they were lighting the boilers and everything, and the doors that were coming down for safety, and those guys were sliding under the doors, so they don't get caught. Well, one gentleman got caught. He was 17 years old. He was working down there, and for some reason that fire door had to come down, and he got caught. He got stuck. He's one of the ghosts that haunts it, that people have seen and heard. They've heard him walking along the the catwalks back there. They also hear pounding. Like the sound of like a wrench kind of pounding on metal. They've heard stuff like that down there. But he has been seen also, and there's a lot of ghosts on there. Trust me. And he's only a couple of the ghosts. He's only one of them plus guys in the bow. But I know there's stories from employees that are closing down for the night, and they're coming down the grand staircase. Because you got to think Titanic here, okay? You got to think like similar to the design of the Titanic, okay? So they're coming down the grand staircase for the night, and they look behind them, and there's a man standing behind them. Sometimes it's captain's uniform. Sometimes it's a guy in overalls, which would be the 17-year-old, of course, walking around the ship. But they'll turn around because they'll feel somebody there, and then this person standing right behind them, you know. And this sometimes happens during the day with people. There's one room that reportedly, and this I cannot attest to because there was a big to do about this room with the show Ghost Hunters as well. When I took the tour, I took the ghost tour back when I was probably 21, 22 with my producer. And Disney turned it into kind of a, Disneyfied it. It Disneyfied the Queen Mary. So you would walk by and doorknobs, would shake. Doorknobs would move as you were walking by. Like I said, Disneyfied the Queen Mary. Okay. So, you gotta take it with a grain of salt at that point. But there's this one stateroom that they claim they can't keep the beds made in it because when they go back in, the bed's unmade. Supposedly they took us by this stateroom. They shut the door, the bed's unmade. But apparently, there was a TV show. I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to get sued by anybody. Apparently, one of the famous ghost TV shows went in there, put a camera in that room, and I don't know what they were thinking, but somebody, probably from the Queen Mary staff, went in there and shut the camera off, unmade the bed, and then turned the camera back on. Because when they went in there and found out and discovered this, they were really mad, and they were kind of really angry at the people that ran the ship at that point. But that's that's supposed to be one of the most haunted rooms because the bed will unmake itself. Like somebody's turning it down for the night, right? The pool area, which you can't, I don't know if you can get in there now or not, because when they gutted the ship, they took out the supports underneath the pool, so they can't put water in there anymore. So it's kind of, when we were there, it was off limits, but there's stories of phantom footsteps in there. You can hear people, and not only footsteps, but you can hear splashing in there. There's stories of people still, I guess, ethereally swimming in this big pool, and you could and they would see wet footprints inside the pool house itself. There were people would witness that stuff. So what's interesting, and what I wanted to find out tonight from Sharon, which obviously it's not going to happen, was that they did have the Titanic relics in there. They brought the Titanic museum stuff and put them on the Queen Mary, and I just wonder if that increased the activity as well over there on there, because I mean you not only had the ghosts from the Queen Mary, but you also had the ghosts from from those relics, whatever was connected to those relics from the Titanic aboard that ship too. I think it might still be there too, for sure. But there have been a lot of deaths on that ship. It's like any other kind of, it's just like any other kind of hotel, because it is a hotel now. They've turned it into a hotel, and even back then, I mean, well, we're cruise ships, but floating hotels, right? Floating hotels. But it's an interesting ship because you actually get to see it. I know, like I said, going back to Titanic, James Cameron's movie, where they showed you what third class was like, where they showed you what second class was like, and first class. When you go on the Queen Mary, they have these staterooms where you can actually see, what the first class and second class and third class rooms were like, and they show you. Here's the first class barber. Here's this. Here's the playroom for the kids, where they would take care of the kids, so the parents could go do what they needed to do, that kind of thing, with their kids, and so you get to see that all around the ship. Now, the place that I always found really creepy, and I don't know if anybody else had any experiences down there. I've never really asked anybody, but there's one place that they left open because, like I said, they gutted the ship. Okay, now all the way down to where the engines would be, shaft alley, it's all gutted, right? Except this one area where they kept one of the propellers attached to the ship, and it's really, to me, I get the weirdest feeling going down this area because you look down. It's like looking down to a real deep swimming pool, and the propeller is right there. It's just sitting there motionless, and I get the creepiest feeling looking at this propeller. Even when I see photos of it, because you can see photos of this propeller online, in the spot where it's at, and it's just I get the most uneasy feeling in there when I'm in there looking at it. I don't know what it is about looking down at this propeller, and it's huge. You can imagine somebody swimming down there trying to do repairs on it. I mean, the thing is huge. It's huge. In fact, I believe there's another propeller. There's a little park area by the ship itself where one of its other propellers is. You know, but it's the only propeller that's still connected to the ship. Like I said, they turn around, gut it out, everything, and so the bottom is all mud for the most part on that ship. You know, but there have been deaths on there. The ghost of one woman that haunts there. She died aboard ship. But the experience that I had going through, like I said, I grew up in this active house, and so not that I was used to paranormal activity because the ghosts here don't bother me as much, but that was the first time I ever had the feeling that something had run through me. I've never experienced that before. That feeling. I mean, I've several times since then. I have, believe me, over the years. But we were walking by this dining area, and my producer was in front of me. Back then we were babies, and I remember she turned around because I stopped, and she turned around. And she goes, "Oh my God, you're really green." And I thought, well, maybe it's the motion of the ship. How did I know? And so the tour guide saw me and came back to talk to me, and he asked me what was going on, and I said, I don't feel that good. I need to sit down. So I sat down, and then I found out that there's a little girl that supposedly fell overboard on the ship, and she likes to try and find. She's trying to find her mother. So she will find women who look like her mother, and she will try to connect to run through them or hug them to see if it's her mother or not. So apparently this is what happened. She went through me, but I had to sit down for like 5 minutes because I was so nauseated from it. It's the first time I've ever had that happen. I call it being goosed by a ghost, where your stomach, all this, and the way to tell is all of a sudden you're walking along, and then your stomach flips, and you think, what the heck was that? But your stomach will flip. So that was my major experience on the Queen Mary. And like I said, I must have been about 21, close to 21, 20 or 21 when it happened. You know, but the ship has the feeling. It's kind of like Winchester Mystery House up in San Jose here. When you go into Winchester Mystery House, you guys know, you know what I can tell you. When you go to a mortuary, doesn't the mortuary have a certain feeling about it when you're in there? There's like a weird vacuum, calm feeling in a mortuary. When you're in there. And the Winchester Mystery House has the same feeling, like that, like a mortuary. And there's times on the Queen Mary when you feel like that. It feels like a mortuary. You feel like you're being watched. You're walking, even during the day, when you're looking around at stuff on the ship, you feel like there's someone watching from a corner when you're out there. There's so much history. I mean, it's incredible to walk, even though half the ship's gone. People don't realize it. They put a good twist on it. To get you to think that the whole ship is there because that's the way they remodeled it and stuff. So you see everything. But the reality is, hi Vera. Yeah, a little smothering. But the reality is half the ship is gone, right? Because they've gutted everything out of it. But it is a feeling like a morgue. Sometimes it gets real heavy there, but you do feel like you're being watched. When you're walking through it. But the thing's huge. I mean, really, honestly, you could see it in one day for a quickie tour. Because there's like 5 or 6, 7 tours, and now there's a paranormal team that does ghost tours at night. That'll let you take equipment in and everything, and they'll work with you and do EVPs and all that stuff at night, which is kind of cool. But otherwise, you take the daily tour and it's a walk around. You have the deck tour, you have the below deck tour, you have there used to be a like I said, Disney had this little ghost tour, right, Disney style, and they have several things, but you can actually stay in a room because it is a hotel and conference center, so you can stay the night, which means you can wander around a little bit at night on your own. So I mean, if you really, like I said, you could do it in one day. You could maybe take 2 tours, do it in one day. I love the way this looks. My camera's way up there. I'm way down here. It looks like my eyes are shut. I love it because I'm trying to look at you guys on the screen. But I would suggest staying overnight, getting a cabin overnight to stay on it. That's what that's what I would suggest. Because then you have the chance to walk around on there and stuff and really look at the stuff, because they've got a lot of cool stuff on there. Like I said, a lot of these shows, a lot of these old TV shows, a lot of movies about cruise ships were filmed aboard the Queen Mary because there's nothing else like it unless they rent the QE2 or something. I mean, back then, like at the time after the Titanic and all that, those ships were designed for pure luxury. And when you see the Queen Mary, you understand it. Just like if you if you see the Poseidon Adventure, the original one, and you go on the Queen Mary, you can go, oh yeah, so and so came down here. That's where they propped the Christmas tree up to climb to get out of the ship, to get out of that area, to go up to the engine area and all that. So it's an interesting ship to visit. And at one time they even had a petting aquarium in there, and I remember going in there. They had like an aquarium set up in there. You could go in there. They had a petting pond where you could pet, different fish and other sea crustaceans and all that stuff. So they had that on there. So they're always, making changes to it for the tourists. Always, you know. But you can see why there's activity too. I mean, the history. It goes back, it goes way back. I mean, World War II. It was moving troops across. It was used, they even, the paint job that it has now was taken off. They painted it. Well, that's why they call it the Gray Ghost. They painted it gray, so that it would merge in with the clouds. So that and like I said, I don't recall. There might be a time it got hit, but I don't think it ever got hit by a torpedo, because not only was it the longest ship around, it was also the fastest at one time. Hey, Mick Mouse, good to see everybody. But I just thought Shelley Winters, yeah, Shelley Winters. But that's where that whole thing was filmed. So it's interesting to see that stuff. And I think there was a Kurt Russell movie filmed. Not Kurt Russell. I heard like I said, go Google it. You'll see what was filmed on it, because I know there were a couple Titanic movies that were actually filmed there, because it's the closest thing they can get to the Titanic is the Queen Mary, unless you build a giant set like James Cameron did, which is what he did. He completely recreated the whole thing. But I mean, back then they didn't have the funds for that sort of thing, so the Queen Mary was the closest best bet for that stuff. But you can understand when you're on there, like I said, you feel like you're being watched. You can understand why there's ghostly activity on this thing, because I mean, if this is how people were living and they enjoyed themselves, I can see why they don't want to leave. I would love to get on there and do an investigation at some point. Because it's just a fascinating place. Like I said, it's a place where you actually feel like you're being watched, and that there's things there. And if you ever get the opportunity just to look it up online and look for that propeller photo, you'll probably get the same feeling I do when I'm looking at that photo, because it creeps me out. It really creeps me out. Because you can imagine, I think they had like 4 propellers on that thing, and so those guys would have to dive down there and do repairs, on the propellers, like in the ocean. I mean, that would really. Because remember the Titanic, when the ship goes up like this, the guy, they have to jump over the propellers. We're talking propellers that big, just like in the movie, And they do have to go down there. I mean, I got a frogman to go down there because it's going to get algae on it. So some poor guy has to dive. Some poor guy has to dive down there every so often and clean the algae off that propeller. They have to do maintenance on it. And it's not in the open ocean. It's literally in this really deep, square deep pool. Talk about claustrophobia underwater. Yikes. But lots of ghost legends. Like I said, the one that really seems to bug people the most. I don't think he's doing it on purpose. Is, like I said, the 17-year-old donkey. It's donkey. They used to call them donkey men. That's what they call them. The ones that worked in the engine room like that. They were donkey men. And like he got, I don't know if he got crushed underneath or he got locked in. Something happened with him, but it's just something where he didn't get out in time, and so they see him all over the ship, all over that ship. And like I said, when you see the size of it, it's astounding. Yeah, it would be. It's cool. It's really cool. I wouldn't mind doing that investigation with them. I mean, it's like $100 a person or something. Don't quote don't quote me on that. I have a friend that knows that team that does those investigations every so often. To look. But EVPs, I'm sure you could get EVPs galore off that thing, especially where the troops were. Because part of um, part of the main ballroom, the big ballroom area where they would have their dances and dinners and stuff. They would they had nothing but cots in there and bunk beds and everything else for the troops that were coming back and forth from England. And there's a lot of history with that too, because you've got the soldiers on there, and again, people had a good time on that ship, and that's usually what happens in hotels and stuff, that they've had such a great time they don't want to leave, even after they've passed, and that's where you get a lot of ghostly activity from, as these people that are real happy, well, want to stay there. Well, you can't blame them. That's the happiest place they were. Me, I like Disneyland, Hawaii. That's where I'll be. You guys want to find me after I'm gone? Go to Disneyland, Hawaii. That's where you're gonna find me. So the Peter Pan ride, flying through. But it is an interesting ship to visit, and it's huge. It's just like they still have the original horn on there. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Lori. They still have the original ship's horn, and they blow it off like I think it's every hour. I'm not sure if it's every hour, but every like at noon and maybe 6. But if you're if you're standing in front of it, good luck, man. That thing is just crazy. You'll be deaf for like 10 minutes afterwards. It's that loud. But it is interesting, because like I said, they preserved the anchor stuff, so you can see how big the anchor chain is for it, and stuff. And what I remember too was that I was peering over the edge of the bow, and I could see dolphins down there playing in the water at Long Beach. It was kind of cool. It's kind of cool. But again, you've got a ship with a lot of history like that, so you are going to get a lot of paranormal activity. And like I said, the little girl, and you've got the donkey man, and there's a gentleman dressed in officer's uniform that walks the deck that they see. Sometimes he'll show up in the dining salon. It's just so many. It's a fascinating place to visit, and they have a huge museum on board. Where you can look at the history of that ship, and not only that ship, you look at of course, Titanic, because everybody's interested in Titanic. So you're looking at that history, but it's interesting to see the history of the ship. And it really, there was really when they brought it to Long Beach, there really was nothing wrong with it. It was just that it got to the point where nobody, because airlines had kicked in, so it was at the point where they weren't making money anymore on it, and they were going to scrap it. And then they decided to bring it to the United States, to Long Beach, to preserve it and turn it into a museum. Otherwise, they would have scrapped it, because you can't afford to keep those things running for peanuts, right? You have to, there has to be a lot of money coming in to pay for the fuel on those ships, on a ship that size. But see, now everybody likes cruise ships, but it's too antiquated and torn up. But yeah, they had lifted. There's like big rooms down the bottom. This is what I've heard. Big rooms down the bottom of the hull where the engine room parts were, but they're not there anymore. There's just holes There's just holes there. You know, and that, I think, is the problem that I heard, is with the swimming area. The one swimming area is because there's no support for it underneath. So they don't want anybody walking in there. If from last time I heard it, I could be wrong now, because maybe they made some improvements. It's slowly collapsing because there's no support underneath for it, and it's heavy because it's all concrete in there. For the pool. But it's interesting to see, and it's interesting to hear the ghostly history on there. People that work nights there or after hours hear noises and voices and everything else when there's no one staying on the ship at all. They're forever hearing stuff, and running into a room and no one's there, that kind of thing on the ship. So it's an interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So it is an interesting place to visit. A very interesting place to visit. I want to enlarge you guys and see if I can enlarge you guys so I can read your comments. Hang on. Probably blow my thing up. Hang on. Let me see if I can do this. Oh, there we go. I can read what you guys are writing. There we go. Hang on. Let me get this up. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now I can see you guys. We can hang together and go everywhere. Yeah. See now, I'm gonna be. It's gonna look like I'm falling asleep, but I'm not. I'm reading your comments. Um, so it's an interesting place. But like I said, I mean, if you don't have a lot of time, there's tours that you can take that will get you through fast. And then if you do have a lot of time, you can stay the night and really, do some exploring, and stuff on there. I don't know if the restaurant, the dining areas are open or not. They might have a place for sandwiches or something on board. But, you know, no, thank you. But it's a place where, it's a place with an interesting history. Because, again, you're not only getting the history of the Queen Mary, because, like now it's Cunard White Star. So, I mean, you're not only getting that history, you're getting the Titanic history, you're getting all that stuff. And then you have to think of the history of what films, it has appeared in and all that, you know? So, I just think, as far as ghost hunting goes, too, surfaces, my wall, right? Like my wall over here, surfaces will absorb energy. Okay, so think of all the energy, even in the main dining room, the big dining room where the guy slept and all that over the years. Think of what that, and a lot of that is teak wood, right? Teak wood is steel underneath, but it's teak wood. Wood really absorbs. So think of all the energy that has been absorbed over the years, which is why you have a lot of activity, because that energy stays. That energy stays, right? So that's something. It's just like the front, the bow out there that ran through the other ship. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of energy there because all those men were killed in the afterworld. Then you go explore the Queen Mary. There you go. just cruise around, go to haunted locations in your afterlife. But so I wish my guest had been on. I mean, just like she said, she had been a tour guide and had information about after hours ghosts and stuff on there, but it didn't happen. But yeah, and it's open. Like I said, it's open to the public. It is a museum. They're trying to get funding to really work on it to do rebuild and stuff on there. You can even see the lifeboats. The lifeboats are still, everything's connected there. It's fun walking the deck, because you feel like you're on a real cruise ship. Well, it is, but it's not. You know what I mean? But you feel like you're in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship. You start to think after a while, Lord, I like this. I could live like this. But like I said, the ghosts that are there liked it so much that they don't want to leave. So like a lot of places here in Northern California, where there's one particular called the Brookdale Lodge. We kind of talked about that the other night on the other show, where it was gangsters. Gangsters stayed in there during Prohibition, and they had such a good time they don't want to leave, so they're still there. And that's what's going on with the Queen Mary. The people had such a good time they don't want to leave. But there are tragic stories, right? The ship had its own morgue. There are tragic stories of people that might have been unalived on the ship too, or I'm sorry, unalived, unalived. That might have been unalived on the ship as well, or maybe they just passed away. Had a heart attack. That was it. So they're kind of stuck there, and they're wandering around. So I'm just saying. I just gave you the top 3 ghosts that I know about that are pretty much the more popular ghosts aboard that ship, and there's a lot more than that. There's a lot more that wander that ship. So if you ever get a chance to get online, do research on it. It is something to do research on because it is very, very, very active. And like I said, I just wonder when they brought in the stuff off of the Titanic to have the little Titanic museum on there. I wonder how many more ghosts came on that ship. Because of that. Because boy, they would have felt right at home there, those Titanic ghosts. Because I mean, you know. But it was interesting. My dad, like I said, my dad knew the main history of the ship. He didn't know the ghostly history, but he knew the main history. So he told me how the anchors worked and all this. Because my dad was on an LST during World War II, so he had knowledge of how ships operated, back in World War II, and so he was able to tell me all about, the different anchorages, where they anchored and what they did during World War II to outmaneuver the submarines and stuff. So he knew all about that stuff. And he was actually kind of like on bow watch, like the LST like those guys on the Titanic when they hit the iceberg. My dad was on bow watch. He was in the Coast Guard, so he was on bow watch, and he says they used to have to sit in the dark for like an hour before they even went out, so their eyes were adjusted to be up there in the crow's nest, so that they could see around because the ships would not run lights at night because of course it was wartime. So they had to be up there in the crow's nest, and be able to see. So he would have to be in the dark like for an hour or more before he was allowed to go out on watch at night. So it's interesting, and then you wonder about that because the ship is so big, and you start to look up at the crow's nest, and you think, oh my God, it's so high up there, you know. So yeah, so there's a rich history. All right, Kathy, I'll see you. See you about an hour. But yeah, so I'm kind of sad that she didn't come on. But on the other hand, we got to chit chat about the ship a little bit and its history. But like I said, I didn't realize the name of the ship was after the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth's mother, at all until today. I just thought that was the coolest thing, to hear. But yeah, it's still, if you look at the length of it, not the height, but the length, it's still one of the longest cruise ships around to this day. Bigger than the QE2, which is kind of cool. So, yep. If anybody have any questions, ask away. Ghost questions, anything like that. Got about 10 more minutes before I sign off here. And then tomorrow, remember, 1 p.m. Pacific, Reverend Bill Bean will be here. He's always fun to have on because we're going to be talking about demonology and demons and fighting evil forces tomorrow. So he's going to be on. And then Wednesday, I've got a gentleman with the last name of Agnew coming on, and he is more of a conspiracy theory kind of guy. So it'd be kind of interesting to talk with him. And then bringing up the rear on Friday is going to be medium Nancy Matz. So she's got some interesting things to talk about, psychic readings and stuff on Friday. So, we've got a nice packed thing. And then next week I've already got 2 people booked. So we're starting to get the show booked up again to where we're going to have guest after guest after guest. And I'm trying to get into a pattern of where I can do this show and then go do the other show without being exhausted. So I was trying to get that pattern and figure out how, to get this show booked up and do different things. I have to coordinate back and forth like this all the time to do that stuff. But, yeah, if I ever get a chance to get on the Queen Mary, I'll take you guys with me, I promise. We'll make a thing out of it, and just make a big thing. And maybe at some point, we could do a meetup, and then some of you guys can fly in. We could do the Queen Mary or the USS Hornet. USS Hornet allows groups to go on board for overnights. You could be on the USS Hornet. I actually picked somebody up on an EVP in the jail in the USS Hornet, and he said, I'm innocent. We went down there for a day trip, and then we ran into a gentleman who does the ghost tours, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take you around, it's a secret. I'll take you around, it's a secret, but you guys can come around with me, and I'll take you down to the haunted locations on here. So he took us around to all these haunted locations. It was pretty fun, on the Hornet. But I remember being down in the jail, and you could hear this guy go, I'm innocent. We picked up that. And then there's like a little room where the morgue was, and he let us go in the morgue in the dark in there and do sessions and things like that. So, just to set up stuff like that. So, like I said, I'm sorry my guest didn't show, Dave. Doing the best I can. Didn't want to just get on there and go, no one's here, and then get off. I just wanted to kind of talk to you guys, get back into doing our shows. So I'm going to try and be more consistent with these shows as well for you guys, and start getting this show up. There's over 1,000 of you that are following me over here now. That are subscribed. I'm really excited about that. This has come a long way. But as soon as I get off here, I will be on TikTok probably around 7 to 7:15 p.m. Pacific. We start doing some tarot card readings over there. But yeah, I just wanted to share some time with you guys. Talk about the Queen Mary a little bit. The stuff that I knew, that my dad taught me, and some of the stuff I read today, which I thought was fascinating. But I love y'all. I love y'all. Thank you all for coming, Vera and Lori and Jennifer, and all that. But yeah, they stay. They stay because they're having a good time. That scene in The Shining, where he goes into into that ballroom, and they're all waiting for him, and he opens the door, and they're lifting the glasses up to let him come in, to welcome him, Jack. I went through that at the Brookdale Lodge when we opened the front door at the Brookdale Lodge. When we walked in, they were all standing there, all these gangsters with their drinks up, just like in The Shining. First place I'd ever seen that. And I kind of stood there and I looked at the psychic that was next to me, and I was like, "Wow, do you see that?" But yeah, they were all standing there like this with their drinks, you know, with their with their drinks, like putting, going, come on in, and join us." But like I said last week when I talked to you guys about that, it was interesting because we were trying to get EVP sessions in that place, and they were kind of shy about talking to us. And then we found out why, because the one gentleman said, "Well, is my wife going to find out about this?" So essentially, they were there with their mistresses, and so they didn't want their wives to find out. That's why they didn't want to talk to us. So then we had to reassure them, "Well, your wife's probably been gone a long time. We're just here trying to get information." And then they started talking to us. So that's another cool place. I may be going there in June or July with Mary, with one of our guests that we have on here, a good friend of mine, Mary Muter. Where we're going to be hitting up the Brookdale Lodge, and that I can go live on for you guys. You know, and there's also that little girl that died in the brook out there, supposedly died in the brook, and she hangs out. You can hear her running around and giggling and singing and all kinds of stuff out there, up and down the halls. She'll knock on doors and open the door, no one's there. Be scared to run. Dude, run! You know? You get used to it after a while. I mean, but the thing is, you have to have respect for it. I've been doing it so long. Somebody the other night on the other show asked me if I get scared. I do. It depends. If it's something I know that's dark and not very nice, that scares me. Because so much can go wrong, but deer in the headlights. But I've been doing it for so long, I'm not going to say I'm used to it, but I have a respect for it because I know that they're on a different plane and that they can do different things than I could do. They can get into my head, they can get into my body, they can get into my head. So you have to have a healthy respect for it. So there has to be some mode of fear in there somewhere. There has to be some fear. Just like when you get into an area, like I talk about Shaft Alley, down there by the propeller on the Queen Mary, that really bugs me, where I'm looking over my shoulder because I get this ominous feeling down there. That's the kind of fear you have to have. That's the kind of fear you have to have, and you have to have a respect for that fear. You have to respect what you're investigating and what you're looking into. Always have to have respect. Mafia is dark, yeah. There's also a hotel out here by the river. Oh, I can't think of the name now. It's with an R. That Marilyn Monroe stayed in, and Clark Gable and a few others stayed in this hotel. That was also mafia run. And that was Prohibition. And the creepy thing about that one was when I came home, my sister had been taking care of my mother, and after my sister left, about 3 in the morning, my mom started screaming in her bedroom. And I go in there, and she woke up, and she said, "They're dumping the bodies in the water. They're dumping the bodies in the river." And so I guess something had followed me home, and my mother saw it in her dream, in a vision in a dream. Which makes sense because if the mob, especially up here, if the mob was going to get rid of somebody, it would be in the Sacramento River, you know. Ride Hotel, that's the hotel. That's the Ride Hotel. So that's the stuff you run into. That's where you have to have a healthy respect for what you're doing. There's groups that go in there pell mell and acting like jerks going into these places with no respect. You have to respect what you're doing. Because they still see it as when they were there, when they were alive. That's how they see the building. That's how they see things. Classes will be starting probably in about 2 weeks. I'm putting together a place where you guys can sign up right now. So I'm going to start getting your classes together to teach you guys, and just for your psychic abilities. And I want to teach you guys some ghost hunting because, the stuff I'm seeing over on TikTok at night from different people, and we'll just leave it at that. And Kathy knows. I want to teach you guys some ghost hunting stuff because A lot, some of the stuff that comes through that's being said as advice and stuff that's not coming from me, it's not so good. You know what I mean? Oh, there you go, Jennifer. That would be fun. A lot of stuff in Sacramento that's haunted. Let me tell you. There's a couple humdinger places actually out here that'll get your attention real fast. But like I said, there's advice going out from people that you will, Lori. You will. How's your mom doing, Lori? Um, there's a lot of advice going out from people that should not be giving advice, if you know what I mean. And so, what I want to do is get you guys in the ghost hunting 101 class that I teach, so that bad advice isn't out there. Because giving bad advice, you can do more harm than good. Jerry's in here. Jerry's on my team. You know, uh, Giving out bad advice, you can do more harm than good. With stuff. So, I would rather have you. I would rather have you go through my ghost hunting 101 class and learn about that different stuff than to have people out here giving bad advice. Over on TikTok, because that does happen. You know. All right, guys. So tomorrow, let me get this back down to where I can see myself. There we go. There I am. Okay, guys. So tomorrow I will be back at 1 p.m. Pacific. Join me, and Reverend. And this is part of the advice thing that I wanted to do, because we had some talk of demons a couple nights ago over at TikTok, and some of the advice was real. Okay, so I was thinking about either teaching the ghost hunting 101 class like immediately, or what could I do about it. So this is why I decided to see if Bill Bean would come on with us to talk about stuff like that, because I would like to clear the air about some of the advice that went out. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna let you guys go. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific. I guarantee you, he will be here. He's real excited about coming back. It's like the third or fourth time he's been on the show, so he'll be back, and yeah, we'll talk demons and stuff tomorrow. Okay, 1 p.m. Pacific, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Sorry I didn't have as much information as I was hoping I was going to have on there, but this happens, right? This happens. All right, guys. I'll see you in about 45 minutes over at TikTok. Bye.